Hello viewers, dear teachers, in this recorded lecture I am going to present about the historical journey of ECCE, that is the Early Childhood Care and Education. So this comes under lecture 6 for the foundational stage course, that is a 6 months course, and here the objective of this is to trace the historical evolution of the early childhood education period across the different time period. We are going to examine the development of ECCE in India from the context of traditional practices to the recent frameworks. So we will, as we move along, we will learn about how the evolution of ECCE till date comes into being. So in this historical journey of early childhood education, we will see that there are different changes from the ancient time to the present scenario. How is the development of ECCE that has come into being? Now let us look at the slides. As you can see here, in the first slide, you can see that it talks about the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And along with this, we have other policies that talks about the rights of the child. So we will not go into the detail of all these policies and frameworks and rights, but because we will talk more into the historical journey of how the evolution of ECCE happened in our state. So in this discussion, we will move in different phases, that is, we will talk about how the evolution happens at the global level, then how it happened in our nation, that is India, and how the development of ECCE happened in our state, Meghalaya. So as we move along, we will discuss into all this. Now you can see from the slide that we have mentioned there the ECD, the ECE and the ECCE, that is given in bracket. So even though these comes to the same definition, it talks about the early childhood, but when we say early childhood development, the ECD, this we talk more about from the 0 to 8 years, and it talks about the all aspects of development of a child where all the stakeholders are involved. Coming to the ECCE, this again talks about the age from 0 to 8 years, and it stress more on the education, the health, the nutrition and the parent engagement. Whereas the ECE, early childhood education, this we try to take more on the 3 to 6 years, that is the age where the child is in a formal setup like in a preschool. Now the term ECE, as the NCF has described, it is early childhood education, and we have the programs on the preschool education where we provide a setting which imparts education to children from the 3 to the 5 years, and we refer to this by many nomenclature. As you know, we have the Anganwadis, we have the Balwaris, we have the nurseries, we have the so-called preparatory stage, we have the pre-primary education, or we call it as the kindergarten. That means these are only the differences in the nomenclature, whereas when we consider the age, it is from the 3 plus to the 5 plus age, and mostly we find that these set up or these early childhood education programs, they happen as part of the primary school. Whereas when we talk about the ECCE, we generally define this in terms of care and education. So we can see the difference there. ECE and ECCE. There is an extra additional E or C, sorry, in the ECCE, which means that we add the care component. So ECCE in the Indian context is generally defined as the care and education of children, and this we consider it from the age of birth to 8 years. From birth to 8 years, that means we divide it into 3 sections. One is the 0 to 3 years old, where we have the stimulation program. Children don't go to a formal setup, but we provide them the stimulation program. Then we have the 3 to 6 years old, which is the early childhood education program, or we also call it the preschool education program, where children between the age of 3 to 6 years, and they are mostly part of the formal setup, as in the current situation. Then we also call it the early primary education program, which is for the 6 to 8 years old, and children attaining by this age, they will be in class 1, 2 and 3. All right. I hope that is clear regarding the ECE and the ECCE. So ECCE is a wide umbrella where ECE comes under it. So since we are going to talk about the historical development of the early childhood education, it is very important for us to know a little bit about what happened before independence and after independence period of our country. So at the time of independence, the need of the preschool education, it was primarily fulfilled by voluntary organization or by the private institutions. So there were several commissions, and the Constitution of India, either as a fundamental rights or as a directive principle of the state policy, they start promoting the use of ECCE in the country. So furthermore, we shall look into it. Here you can see in this slide, we mention about the international and the national commitments to ECCE, that is at the global level and at the national level. At the global level, you can see that we talk about the international commitments like the Millennium Development Goals, MDG, we have the education for all, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. Then comes the constitutional provisions of our country, like the directive principles of the state policy and the RTE Act. And with this comes the policies and the schemes. You must have heard about the National Policy for Children 1974. Way back in 1974, we have the ICDS as a scheme or as a program. It happens in 1975 from then till date. Then we have the NPE, National Policy of Education, which is in 1986. Then we have the NNP relating to nutrition program 2002, and we have the National Policy on Early Childhood Care and Education, that was in 2013. And from the policies, we get the frameworks and the guidelines. Like the NCF 2000-2005, we have the ECCE curriculum developed by the MWCD in 2014. We have the preschool curriculum by the NCRT in 2019. So this is to show that from the international level and at the national level, from all these we have the policies and the schemes from in the various years, and from the policies we get the framework and the guidelines. So we will go more into this. This is just an introduction of what is happening at the international level, global level, and at the national level, or the national commitments to ECCE. So here in this slide you can see about the recent milestones, what we have now. We have in 2013 we have the national ECCE policy. In 2014, after the policy comes the national ECCE curriculum framework. This is through the MWCD. Then we have the guidelines for preschool education and also the preschool curriculum. These were developed by the NCERT in 2019, and the most recent, as we all know, we are all aware of this, that in 2020 we have a national education policy. So if you think about it, we have a policy that is the National Policy of Education way back in 1986, and even from that policy, that was the policy which talks about the ECCE. And now we are coming to our latest policy, that is National Education Policy 2020, which talks more about the ECCE, and we will look more into this. So in continuation, as soon as we have this policy in 2020, in the next 2 years, that is 2022, we have for the first time the National Curriculum Framework. We call it the NCF for the foundational stage. It is for the first time in the history of India that we have such a curriculum, and we call it the NCF for the foundational stage, and it talks about the ECCE. So as I've said, and you can see in this slide as well, there are many other policies that mention or that has impacted, even though they don't mention directly, but it has impacted the ECCE. It was in 1974, we have the National Policy for Children. In 1986, as I've said just now, that we have the National Policy on Education, in which this policy for the first time talks about the importance or the significance of the ECCE. And in continuation to that, there is the Program of Action in 1992. And in 1993, we have the National Nutrition Policy. In 2002, we have the Health Policy, and in 2005, we have also the National Plan of Action for Children. Now, why we talk about the policies? Because it is from these policies the significance of ECCE is as till date. It starts from the policies, then we go into the various commitments and frameworks and implementations in our state and in the country. So let us move now to the Indian context. That was just an awareness or like an introduction. Now we talk about the Indian context. India, our country, it has the largest child population in the world. This is as per the last census, 2011 census. For the children of 0 to 6 years, we have 158.8 million children. Now we are moving to the next census, which is still in the very initial stages. We don't have the statistics, but here we can see from the 2011 census, we have 158.8 million children. So realizing this, there is a need for early interventions, especially for the economically marginalized communities. And As per statistics and records, the overall Human Development Index in our country is quite low. India's progress in moving towards the MDG, that is the Millennium Development Goals that I've mentioned in the previous slides. The move towards the MDG in our country is very low compared to other developing countries. So, we have to understand clearly now from here and from the policies the need for the early childhood care and education, where there is so much talk about in the global context, international level, and in the Indian context. These global events have also influenced the field of ECCE in India. So, there is very much need, the felt need for early intervention, especially for children from the marginalized communities. Looking at the slide, you can refer to the second point, that India has the largest child population in the world. The population is 158.8 million for the 0 to 8, and the Human Development Index is quite low. It has stepped down. India's progress in moving towards the Millennium Development Goals is much slower. You can understand that. It is much slower than the developing countries. It is slower than Nepal, for example, than Bangladesh or China. So, in relation to the goals, that leads to primary school completion. So, we have an overall HDI which is very low. So, because of all this, when we talk about the Millennium Development Goals, which is stated at the international level, there is the concern need where we have to uplift or to improve the health, the nutrition and the education of the young children. The health, I'll repeat again, there is very much concern about improvement the health, the nutrition and the education. These are the three things. When we talk about ECCE, we don't talk only about education. Dear teachers, it starts from the health along with the nutrition and the education for the young child. Therefore, this early childhood education, in terms of education, in terms of development, it is the first and the essential step that we have to move so that we achieve the Millennium Development Goals. Okay, now as we are aware of all that, let us see what happens in India. What normally do we have in India as far as the ECCE is concerned? India, we know that it has a wealth of traditional practices that dates back many years. So when we talk about ECCE, we don't mean to say that since it has been mentioned in the 1986 policy, it is not that prior to that we don't have any concept of ECCE, because India, it has a wealth of traditional practices for ECCE that dated many years back. The early period education for children, it has its initiative in India, and this has been documented in the later 19th century. We have pioneers. You have heard about Gijubai, you heard about Tarabai Modak, you've heard about Maria Montessori, and you must have also read about the writings of the great Indian thinkers like Mahatma Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore. These all, the pioneers, the thinkers, they have drawn our attention to this important aspect of early childhood education. At the time of independence, The need of preschool education was primarily fulfilled by voluntary organization and private institution, which you have seen in the previous slides. So, there were several provisions in the Constitution of India, either as a fundamental right or as a directive principle of state policy. They have used to promote the ECCE service in the country. And it is also important for us to know that the first formal institutions of the preschool age children of around 3 to 6 years in India, it was mainly opened by the foreign missionaries in the 19th century, and from there on it expanded further. So, having a thought about that, when we talk about India, we have these traditional views. Like in ancient India, the education generally started between the age of 5 to 7 years, because it was only recently that we have the age specification of by which age a child will attend the formal schooling. But in the ancient India, education started around 5 to 7 years, that is when a child will go to a formal setup, but not for the masses. So, what happened during this age or before this age, the child, even though he is not in a formal setup, but the child received the education from the environment, that is from the socialization, that is from the family, where he received the inculcation of the family values. There is the love, the care, the stimulation from the elders, the grandparents in a joint family setup. And all these signifies that the institution of the family plays a major role in the process of socialization of the child. But alongside, I will say that this may not happen universally for all children. Maybe some children received all the stimulations, the care, the love, all that from the family, and some does not. So this traditional wisdom about the significance of the early childhood period and the role of the family in the child all-round development, it still makes the conscience of the nation, but it is still there. But its application, it has been hampered, and gradually it is getting diluted. Diluted in the sense that as now we are in the age of urbanization and globalization, so the compulsions like the breaking down of families, from the joint families, we have the nuclear families because of the forces of industrialization, urbanization, modernization, we may call it. So, the stimulation and all these socialization process that a child gets from the home, now it has been diluted. Okay. Now, when we talk about the traditional wisdom, as I said, it has been diluted as of today's age. So, the concern for ECCE has become more and more. We call the first 6 to 8 years of a child's life, that is the early childhood stage, it is globally acknowledged to be a critical period where a child has to receive some kind of a knowledge for lifelong development, because the age, the first 6 or the first 8 years of a child, it lays a foundation for the inculcation of social values, personal habits, and that is known to last a lifetime. So, in this age of globalization and modernization, children has missed out that traditional wisdom. So, we have to take concern of how these children of the 6 to 8 of the 0 to 6 or 8 years, how they will get the same traditional wisdom so that it will help them in their critical period. So the concern becomes more and more as of now. What I mean to say? So when we talk about this early childhood education stage, or the preschool stage, we may call it, or the pre-primary education, see, these are of the same. When we say ECE stage, or the preschool stage, or the pre-primary education, what we mean to say is that it refers to the 2 to 3 years of children being in a formal setup where their age will be around 3 to 6 years, and this is the age that is from 3 to 6 where they require a center or a school-based pre-primary education program. The importance for lifelong learning and development, and to enable children to have a strong foundation where they have critical linkages with the enrollment of children in schools and to bring about learning outcomes. I hope you get that connection, why I'm talking about this, and I refer to the traditional wisdom where children in the centuries before, they don't go to school as early as 3 years. There were no formal setup for them. So these children, they get most of the values, tradition, knowledge, all that they get from the home, the family, living in a joint family, from the socialization process. But as years goes by, we are moving from staying in a joint family. Now we are moving to nuclear families. We are far away from the elders. So the child has to be in a place, a setup, where he will get all these linkages, where he will get all the lifelong learning, where it will help him have the critical languages which is important for his age. So the concern for having a preschool stage, a formal setting like getting the pre-primary education is very crucial. All right, so before we come into all this, first we have to know about what happened during the pre-independence period in India. How is the evolution of ECCE in pre-independence period? As you can see here, there are not many reports about the pre-primary education or the preschool education in India before 1947. Again, I am repeating, the word ECCE has come in vogue very recently as in the NEP 1986. So the pre-primary education has been often deliberated as a distinct stage before the start of the formal schooling. So we can understand now that the preschool education doesn't come under the formal schooling. When we say formal schooling, it starts with class 1 above. So in India, the first formal institutions for the preschool age were started mainly by the foreign missionaries in the late 19th century, and from then it expanded further in the next 2 to 3 decades, which initiative of starting the elementary schools starts from that period, and these schools, they have attached pre-primary classes, or where they start the nursery schools and the kindergarten. So it is with the coming of the foreign missionaries that we start having the idea of having a formal setup as nursery schools and kindergarten. That was pre-independence India. So the focus of the preschool education in the course of time, it has shifted to meeting the needs of the masses. Thus, the concept, the focus and the form of early childhood education has changed significantly over the last few decades. So, during the pre-independence period, there were many efforts to promote the preschool education, and these were largely confined to the voluntary sector. When I say voluntary, as I said, in India, it all started with the coming of the foreign missionaries. And this preschool education, it found no recognition and support from the government. Even though we have schools, but schools are mainly the formal schooling which starts from class 1 above and not for the preschool education, where before the coming of the missionaries, children learn from the families, and when they join formal setup, it will be mostly from 6 or 7 years age, and before that they learned at home. So the coming of the missionaries, they started introducing the nursery schools and the kindergarten schools, and then where children can go in a formal and learn from the formal setup. All right. Now coming to post-independence India. I hope it's clear with the last slide, that is pre-independence India, where there was not much talk about the ECCE, because ECCE started only with mentioning in the 1986. So prior to that, education for children happens at home. When I say education, means for the preschool education, it happens at home, and the coming of the missionaries, they introduce the concept of having nursery schools and kindergarten. And we also have to understand that this is not for the masses, because it becomes expensive. Only those who can pay for it, they get to go to these set up of nursery schools and kindergarten. Now let's see what happened in the post-independence India, that is after India attained its independence. So after 1947, the government of India started taking various measures through the 5-year plan to address the issues concerning the preschool education. Whereas the ECCE, it is only within the purview of the voluntary section or the private section. And there was a mention in 1968 where the committee highlighted the importance of providing child care and education through the government sector. So in 1986 NPE, which is revised in 1992, it is a historic development which accorded the top priority to ECCE. It is this policy which we can say it is an important landmark, as it was for the first time that ECCE has been brought under the umbrella of education. I'll repeat again, it was for the first time that ECCE has been brought under the umbrella of education, and this laid the emphasis for the integration of programs of child care and to bring it again along with preschool education with a holistic view of the child development. So from there, we have the DPE, we have the SSA, we have the ICDS and so on, and all these refer to the preschool education for children up to the age of 6 years. We shall discuss more in detail. So here, as I mentioned here, it is a paradigm shift. The approach to ECCE is a paradigm shift. First, it was thought about to be a welfare. Then they have linked it to ECCE importance in terms of development, and then to the right of children. So the shift was that because when we talk about preschool education, and at the time when we have the preschools set up by missionaries and private organizations, it is only for the children who can whose parents can pay for that. It is expensive. It is not for the masses. So from the government, they started implementing various schemes and programs to enroll children, to bring children, to take care of children. And then we have, because of all this, the demand was that we have to give some care, some welfare, some help to the children. And thus comes the ICDS schemes, which is an integrated services which started in 1975. And under the ICDS, we have the Anganwadi centers, where they were supposed to run the preschools. And not just the preschools, the main concern for the ICDS is the health along with the nutrition. And later, it was thought that, and it was implemented that along with the health and the nutrition, they introduced the preschool education through the ICDS scheme. That means a child from 3 to 6 years can get enrolled in the ICDS or in the Anganwadi centers which have been set up throughout the country, so that children of this age will receive the nutrition, the health and the preschool education from the Anganwadi centers. So this is a big shift from what was happening before. Then again in 1986, where the policy addressed the ECCE, and also it mentioned about discouraging the teaching of the 3R. That means we should not introduce direct reading, writing and arithmetic to the child. Then we have successive plans like the 9 plan, the 11 plan, which have reduced the divide between the ECE and the ECCE. So we can understand that through these 5-year plan, there is a bigger understanding and appreciation for ECCE, and ECCE has undergone many changes from the perspective of the child welfare to a new understanding of child development in the background of the child's rights. So let us see what happens later. As I mentioned here, the term preschool education, PSE, we have to understand it that it is the same, or we can use it interchangeably with early childhood education, and as in our state we often call it the pre-primary education. And under it there are varieties of nurseries and Montessori schools and kindergarten schools which are run by government or which are run by the private organization. And in the government we have the Balwaris and the Anganwadis. So all these refer to that early childhood education, or we can call it the preschool education, or we can also call it the pre-primary education. Whereas when we talk about ECCE, remember here when we talk of ECE, it is under the ECCE, but it is specific for the 3 to 6 years. Whereas when we talk of ECCE, it is from 0 to 8 years, and it covers the early childhood education, it covers the early stimulation programs, and it also covers children from 6 to 8 years, that is the early primary education program. Now, as we are in this period of time where we also have the NEP 2020, and of course we will deal with this later, and as we are aware that the NEP 2020 is the first policy that brings about structural changes, where it talks about the foundational stage. And what is there in the foundational stage? It talks about the 3 to 8 years, where 3 years of preschool stage, that is the ECCE or the early childhood education, and we also include the grade 1 and the grade 2. So now we don't talk only about the 3 to 6 years, but we refer to from the 3 to the 8 years, where there is a continuation in many aspects between the preschool stage and the grade 1 and the grade 2. That's why the realization for this, we saw it in the NEP 2020, where it has linked the preschool and the early childhood care and education, and we refer to this in totality, we refer it as the foundational stage. So all these terms, when we say foundational stage, we mean 3 to 8 years, that is, we consider the preschool along with the grade 1 and the grade 2. When we say early childhood education, that is 3 to 6 years, and when we talk about ECCE, we refer from the stimulation period till the age where the child attained the 6 and the 8 years. So this is that changing concept. So coming back to this ECCE programs in India. So as you've seen in the previous slides, we have many policies. All those policies, they have resulted in bringing about many changes and formulating various programs and schemes for ECCE, and they are in the form of ECCE can be as a pre-primary section, a preschool, a preparatory school, a nursery, a kindergarten. So these are just the nomenclature when we refer to the ECCE. So as what is happening in our country and in our state, all these preschool, preparatory school, nursery, kindergarten, they are run by the education department or they are run by the private sectors, and they can call these by different names. Then we also have, in addition to these sections which are under the education department, we also have the preschool education component which is run by the ICDS, that is also through the Government of India, and this happens at the Anganwadi centers. Okay, so you can understand that we have two big programs in India for the ECCE. One that is run by the Anganwadis through the ICDS or through the social welfare, and it comes under the MWCD. And another one which is run by the Ministry of Education through the schools and through the education department. So we have two parallel sections here, and they all work for the ECCE. So coming to the ICDS, as we know, it is the largest program in the world. The ICDS scheme that we have in India, that is run through the Anganwadis, it is the largest program for preschool education in the world, and it started in the year 1975. So the ICDS scheme was drawn up by the Ministry of Social Welfare, and all shift in policies for the ECCE has been transferred and given to the MWCD in the year 2006. The scheme has been centrally assisted since its inception, and the financial assistance like infrastructure, salaries, honorarium, etc. have been provided by the government, where the states have their own share. So we all know that we have all the Anganwadi centers set up, and they are working for the ECCE. Now what is happening currently? Since this is a historical perspective, I am not going into the detail, but I am just telling you briefly about the historical perspective. So coming to the current situation, like what do we have now? You all know that we have the ECCE policy through the MWCD. This is the first policy that is exclusively for the children for the age of 3 to 6 years. We have, from this policy, we get the ECCE curriculum framework, that spells out the vision of the ECCE as mentioned in the policy. Then we have the quality standards, which sets the context for the minimum specifications, the norms, the standards of what we require to have an ECCE center. Then we have the guidelines for preschool, the curriculum that has been given through the NCERT. Along with that, we have the policy, that is the NEP 2020, where we are all aware of, where it talks about the structural changes in the education system, where we have the 5+3+3+4 system, and we are mostly concerned with the 5 because it is there in that 5 where it linked together the preschool stage and the grade 1 and grade 2. Then along with this, we also have to know about the Nipun Bharat 2021. The Nipun Bharat, it is for attaining the goals of the FLN, Foundational Literacy and Numeracy. And this also, Nipun Bharat, is an outcome of the NEP 2020. Then following to that, we have the NCF, Foundational Stage in 2022, and this also is an outcome of the policy where it is the first ever integrated curriculum framework for children for the age of 3 to 8 years. It is a direct outcome of the curricular and pedagogical structure that the NEP has come out for the school education, because it was for the first time that we are taking together or having the foundational stage where we have to link the curricular and pedagogical structure for the preschool and grade 1 and grade 2. So this we will find it in the NCF FS 2022. Now after all that, I think it is also important for us to know briefly about the preschool education in Meghalaya. We have talked about all the policies, we have talked about the framework, we have talked about the pre-independence period, we have talked about the post-independence period of what is happening in India. So it is also important for us to know about our concern towards preschool education in our own state, that is Meghalaya. So briefly I will take you into this, as you can see also from the slide, and it is mostly the same as what is happening in the whole country. Like before the coming of the British in Meghalaya, as you know we are talking about our state, before the coming of the British, there was no formal education in any corner of Meghalaya. Children, they received their education from the parents and the families and not from the formal setup. So this formal setup, it was introduced by the Christian missionaries, where they set up a number of educational institutions. So when I say no formal education, I mean for the preschool education. The first elementary school in Meghalaya, it was established in the East Khasi Hills district, and it was meant for children, teaching children to be able to read and write, and so that when children are able to read and write, they will be appointed as teachers later, and they will teach other children how to read and write. So you can understand, we were in such a state of backwardness. The flame of education was lighted in this land by the hands of the British missionaries, and of course in later years we have other missions like the Roman Catholic mission, we have the Ramakrishna and other voluntary organizations, missionaries that helps in then setting up schools and colleges in Meghalaya. That was pre-independence. Now I would also like to mention, if we talk about the school education in Meghalaya in the pre-independence period, we have to understand that the formal education in Meghalaya begins from class 1. Formal education begins from class 1. And prior to class 1, what we have is, as we commonly call it as class A, class B. So primary education in Meghalaya is the first level of education with the common goal and objective to achieve universalization. Primary education in Meghalaya consisted of a 5-year schooling, that is, it consists of class A, class B, class 1, class 2 and class 3. So these are run by the district council of the state, except in Shillong municipality. So the education later on, the education department restructured and they have arranged that the primary school to be comprised of only from class 1 above, where these primary school they will have attached pre-primary section. So we can say that the pre-primary section exists as part of the primary education, but it was not with the concern of the government, but it lays mainly with the concern of the private and the voluntary agencies, as the government did not pay much attention to it, since the focus was mainly towards achieving UEE, universalization of elementary education. So what happens was that in the post-independence period, in our state, we have the primary education along with the class A and class B. These are the non-formal, these are the preschool education. So why we have this is because the coming of the British, the missionaries, has helped setting up these non-formal education or the class A, class B or the pre-primary education. So we already have a setup or an arrangement of the preschool education right from that pre-independence of Meghalaya. So in the year 1990, the education department arranged the new structure where the primary education will consist of class 1 to class 4 along with attached pre-primary for the 4 to 5 years. That means a child who has attained the age of 4 or 5 years plus can enroll in these class A, class B, and the age of admission for the formal schooling, that is class 1, has to be 6 plus of age. So what happened in Meghalaya as far as the policies is concerned, the goals and objective of education as incorporated at the national level has been accepted in the state as well. So the pre-primary schools in the state consist of the Montessori's, kindergarten, the Balwaris and all such type. Children from 3 to 5 years, they join these preschool classes, and or they can go to the Anganwadis that has been set up by the social welfare department. So it's either they go to an Anganwadi when they have reached that age, maybe 3 plus, where the parents want to keep them at the Anganwadis, and after completing the non-formal preschool education, they can join class 1. Or what is basically happening in our state is that since we have the concept or the setup of the preschool education since time of the British, so normally what we do is when the children has reached the age of 4 years or 3 plus to 4 years, we mostly keep them in the pre-primary section in the formal setup. So the effort to lend the support and to manage the academic aspects of education in Meghalaya, for this number of organizations has been set up by the government, and it has set up at both the state and the district level. So like we have the DRTs, we have the diets, and all these institutes, they provide the training and the support to the ECCE program, at the state and the district level. Now, little bit we can talk about, or we have to know about, the preschool education under the SSA. There was a time in the year 2000 and 2001 and 2 that SSA as a comprehensive flagship program was implemented by the Government of India, and it was launched in this year, and also in our state it was launched to universalize and to improve the quality education and to support the preschool education in Meghalaya. So what happened during this time? For many years the SSA, they set up the ECCE centers in villages, and it is important to also know that they set up the ECCE centers where children of the age of 3 to 6 years can enroll, but the setup is in such an area where there is no Anganwadi center. As you can understand, Anganwadi under the ICDS has been set up in various villages in our state and throughout the nation. So this SSA set up the ECCE centers in only the areas where there is no Anganwadi center. That means in the area where there is an Anganwadi center, the children can enroll there, but in those areas or villages where there was no Anganwadi set up, so they set up the ECCE so that children from that area can enroll in these ECCE centers. So we understand from here that the SSA recognize the importance of ECCE. So even though we have the class A and the class B in the pre-primary as pre-primary sections in the school system, so it is also important to understand that these SSA school where they set up the ECCE centers, they set up in that area where there were no Anganwadi centers. This is one part. In the next part is that it set up the ECCE center sometime in the same school where they have the class A and the class B. That is, it support the preschool section of that village or of that area. So most of the ECCE centers in the state function in lower primary school building, and the classroom was always shared with other classes. So it is an aid or a help to provide support to the ECCE. So basically it support the preschools of those areas where the preschools are already in place in some primary school. Now ICDS. ICDS, we know that it started in year 1975 in our state, and this ICDS is a unique program. It concerned the health, the nutrition as well as development for children, and later on it was realized that not only the health and nutrition is necessary, but we also need the preschool education part to be run in the ICDS centers. So when they introduced the ICDS, first it started with providing nutrition and health for the young children. Then later on in that relaunch mode, it introduced the concept of giving or providing the preschool education to children. So now we can say that the ICDS, as far as the children of 3 to 6 years are concerned, they go to ICDS for the health, the nutrition as well as the preschool education. As we are almost to the last part of the discussion, what I wanted to stress here is that as teachers who are working for the foundational stage, we have to know about these latest intervention post NEP. So teachers, before coming to this, see, we have discussed the historical perspective for ECCE. I've been trying to give you some brief idea about all the policies that we have in our country. Then we talk about the pre-independence period in India, the post-independence period as well, briefly. Then we have come to a small section where we have to know about the pre and post independence of our state, where it concerned the ECCE. And now we come to this, just to mention that we have to be aware of all this, the latest intervention that happened post the NEP 2020. So teachers, it is important for you to know that now after the NEP 2020, we have the NCF for the foundational stage at the national level. So from there we have come up with the SCF, that is the State Curriculum Framework for the foundational stage. This has come up so that it will help us in the area of foundational stage. It is a curriculum framework. So from the curriculum framework, we have drawn out the foundational stage curriculum. So from the policy, we have the framework. From the framework, we have the curriculum. And this curriculum, I must say that it is the first curriculum in the history of our state that we are able to have a curriculum for the foundational stage. Not only for the foundational, even for the pre-primary stage as well. So this curriculum talks about the foundational stage, where it talks about the early childhood period along with the grade 1 and the grade 2, because it is foundational stage. Then along with that, we have the syllabus for the foundational stage. Along with the syllabus for the foundational stage, we have come up with the syllabus for the grade 1 and grade 2. Because it is foundational stage, so we have divided into two stages. One is for the early childhood period, 3 to 6 years, and also we have it for class 1 and class 2. Along with that, we have the resource books for teachers. See, we have a resource book for teachers for preschool 1 to 3. But I've mentioned there, we don't have textbook. So we are not supposed to have textbook for the preschoolers 3 to 6 years, but the resource book will help the teachers for all the activities. And along with that, we have the assessment framework for the preschool 1 to 3. So teachers, in this lecture, I have been able to trying to bring about the historical perspective for early childhood education, where we have talked about the important policies, we have talked about what happened in the post and pre-independence period in India as far as ECC is concerned. We have also talked about the status or the concern of our state towards early childhood education, both in the pre-independence and in the post-independence period. So I hope things are clear, and this is a brief discussion on the historical perspective for early childhood education. Thank you.